What do Falcons do? We rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, a show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, the Golden Hard Dog, and a lifelong sports fan. Coming back to you today, I have completed the NFC series, going through all four divisions. Feel free to go back and watch any of those four videos to find your team if you want to hear me talk about them for about 3 or 4 minutes each. Just a very quick highlight and thoughts on their schedules. We're going to go into the AFC starting today, and then when I get done, I'll wrap it all up with a video going through my playoff bracket and how I think it's going to turn out before the season ever starts. And again, we haven't had any major injury news so far with any division, so things can change, but this is before any of the OTAs with significant injuries or anything like that. I don't know of anything that's come out at this point in time. But we're going to start out AFC South. So as always, let's get a few housekeeping things out of the way. Each one of these guys is going to play the other team twice in their own division. They're going to play the NFC North this year. They're all going to play the AFC East as well this year. And then each opponent gets one team from the NFC East based on how they finished last year. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's start with the Colts. Anthony Richardson going out last year really derailed this team. He was looking pretty good in his first few starts and then ended up going out for the season with an injury last year. He had to have Gardner Minshew step in, Gardner is more than adequate as a starter. He had a great chemistry with Michael Pittman, and it ended up being a pretty good season. I think the biggest thing for you guys, had y'all beat the Falcons, is you would have probably made the playoffs in that instance. But the Falcons, for whatever reason, found a way to take it to you in Atlanta, and it just didn't work out for you. So it's tough for me to really grade this team. They had a good draft. They got Latu, the guy that I wanted for the Falcons. Really sucks to see that happen. They get guys like Adonai Mitchell. They get Matt Goncalves, offensive tackle out of Pittsburgh. And then they had a bunch of day 3 picks as well. They gained guys like Joe Flacco as a backup. They really didn't sign a ton of free agents. They re-signed a ton of their team, including DeForest Buckner, Zaire Franklin, and they got Kenny Moore as well. And then Michael Pittman, like I said, he also re-signed for a massive contract as well. They lose guys, Gardner Minshew. The biggest loss to me is either Minshew or Zach Moss at running back, who also had to step in for Jonathan Taylor, who was not healthy for a significant portion of the season last year. They lose Isaiah McKenzie, which isn't the biggest loss in the world, except for on special teams, and then they also lose Jake Martin. But that's it. They really are maintaining the same team going into the next year. Their unique opponents include the Steelers, and then they have to go to the Broncos, and then they do have to go to the Giants on New Year's or around New Year's. So that's going to be a very cold New York game outside in the Meadowlands in a stadium that is notorious for causing injuries to players. Reasonably, when I look at their schedule, this is a team that was pretty good last year. They weren't great. They were just middle of the road, but they were decent enough. Had Anthony Richardson been there, I think this could have been an 11-6 team last year. Gardner Minshew doesn't have the same upside, I think, is Anthony Richardson, and we'll see if he's the same player coming out. If he is the same player that he was before the injury, I believe wholeheartedly this could be one of the better teams in this division, and they could have a 12-5 record as their ceiling. Their floor, I don't think they're going to be much worse, even looking at their schedule. They don't have to play Miami in the hot part of the year. They get Miami in Indianapolis in October, so you don't have to worry about going down for an awful game that way. You do have the Patriots in Foxborough in December, which is going to be a little bit tough just for weather. So it really depends. The Dome team is always a little bit sketchy in weather, but I'm just looking at their cold weather games, and there's not a lot of them on the schedule here. So with that in mind, I think 12-5 is a reasonable ceiling. 8-9, I think, is a reasonable floor. They could potentially have a losing season if things go poorly. I don't think Joe Flacco is going to have the same magic if Anthony Richardson goes down. And if he goes down, then really this could be an even lower floor, but I'm assuming that things just maybe he has a sophomore slump or he's not quite the guy that he was before he got hurt. But I reasonably think 10-7 competing for the division. It's gonna be very close in this division. It's gonna really depend on how they finish with the record against the Texans and like opponents. But I do think 10-7 is where they finish this year. Then we're going to go on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville, I don't think had the strongest draft in the world. I don't love Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round. I think he was more of an early second round guy. They got Mason Smith, defensive tackle at LSU. That's fine. And then Jerry and Jones out of Florida State at corner. Also fine, whatever. They had a bunch of day 2 picks or day 3 picks as well. But you're gaining some guys and you're losing some guys here. This was their division to lose last year, and they lost it spectacularly. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why they are not finding success. I don't know why Lawrence is not turning into the savior that he was meant to be, because he has definitely shown flashes at times. They have one of the better coaching staffs, but they finished 9-8 last year. They gained guys like Mac Jones. Gabe Davis is probably one of their biggest acquisitions. Ezra Cleveland, Mitch Morse on the offensive line. They re-signed Josh Allen to a massive contract at potentially $150 million. They get Oluokun back again, big signing for him. Eric Armstead, Darnell Savin, and Trey Flowers are some of the more notable signings. But they're losing Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones, Calevon Chason, Darius Williams, and Fatukasi. I'm not sure how you say that guy's name. He's a pretty decent defensive tackle. You get the Browns, you have to go to the Eagles, and you have to go to the Raiders for your unique opponents. This is not an easy schedule, and I think you lost more talent than you gained overall. With that in mind, I think the ceiling when I went through this is 11-6. I think the Colts have a better ceiling than you do because they have a slightly easier schedule. And I think it's really about the schedule. I think you're a team that's going to compete, but it's going to be really tough. 6-11, I think, is your floor. Again, this is going to count to injury. It counts to the toughness of the schedule, the draws that you get. I think you could lose all 3, at least 2, if not all 3 of your unique opponent games. If the Raiders end up being any good at all, they have a ton of offensive talent and defensive talent. It's just a matter of if they can get that quarterback spot together. So I do believe that you are going to lose some games this year, and it's not your division anymore. You had a chance and you didn't take it. I'm going to say 9-8, just like you finished last year, is where you finished this year. I haven't completed the other 3 divisions yet, so I don't know if that's going to be good enough to sneak into the playoffs, but I do think you're going to finish behind 2 other teams in this division. Speaking of another team that's going to do pretty well in this division, let's talk about the Houston Texans, or as Tom Grassi, who is also working on his international tour, he's in Mexico at this time, completing his international tour to raise money for St. Jude's and to visit the international stadiums, but he also calls them the Strouds. So let's talk about these guys. Some of their additions, they get Joe Mixon. Stephon Diggs is the huge addition here. They re-signed Dalton Schultz. They get Danico Autry. They signed Danielle Hunter in the offseason, which was awesome. They get Azeez Al-Shaair, they get Jeff Okudah, C.J. Henderson, and Kymie Fairburn re-signed as well. So you get a ton of talent coming back. But my God, this is a team that lost a ton of players as well. Just looking at the list of it, they had to replace a bunch of guys. They lost Devin Singletary, George Fant, Josh Jones, Michael Dieter, Jonathan Greenard, Jerry Hughes, Malik Collins, Sheldon Rankins, Taylor Tart, Blake Cashman, Denzel Perryman, Steven Nelson, Tavier Thomas, Adrian Amos, DeAndre Houston Carson, Kareem Jackson, and Cameron Johnston, the punter. So they lost a ton of talent as well. So you had to replace guys in free agency. And I think they also had a decent draft considering that they didn't have a first-round pick because of moves they made last year to secure their future. They did take Georgia guy Kamari Lassiter, first pick in the second round for them, which is pick 10 overall in the second round. I don't know that Kamari is the greatest corner they could have taken here. He's certainly solid. I would have said he was going to be an early round 3, late round 2 guy, but hey, I am very happy to see him come off the board. They also took another tackle in Blake Fisher, and then Kalen Bullock as a safety out of USC, and then again, they had a handful of day 3 picks as well that we won't get into too much. Their unique opponents include going to the Cowboys, going to the Chiefs, and then playing the Ravens in Houston. I don't know if you could ask for a tougher draw of opponents. And because of that, because they are playing the NFC North, which again, I think there's going to be 2 teams there that are incredibly difficult to beat, and then one wild card and one easy team. I think you could have 5 losses right there between those two divisions. Interdivision play is always tough as well, and you're not going to probably beat everybody in the AFC East, which may have 3 teams that are going to the playoffs depending on how we look at this when we get to the AFC East. This is going to be a tough schedule, and because of that, I don't think your ceiling is any higher than 12-5. I think you could be a heavy favorite in a lot of games or a slight favorite in a lot of games, but it's going to be really tough. And again, I like your picks. I like what you've done, but this is not going to be an easy year. I think 9-8 is a reasonable floor. I do think you finish with a winning season. But 10-7 feels right, tying with the Colts, and it just coming down to who plays better throughout the season. I do think that will be you. I think you're going to win the division, but I think it's going to be really, really tight, and it's going to really depend on your interdivision play. But yeah, I have you finishing 10-7. It has nothing to do with your talent. It has everything to do with your opponent draws and how tough your schedule is. And then finally, let's finish off with the team that I think is interesting to say the least, but is losing some very key pieces here, one of which is going to the Baltimore Ravens, which is going to make that Houston game even more difficult. Let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee was not good last year. They went 6-11. Oh, and by the way, Texans went 10-7 last year. But 6-11 for the Titans. Some of the notable additions for them. They're getting Tony Pollard. They do get Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd, which I think will bolster the wide receiver room, along with DeAndre Hopkins, who is aging. You get Lloyd Cushenberry, Chidobe Azuize, I'm not sure how to say his name. And L'Jarius Sneed is the big acquisition. So you made some big moves, but you also lost some huge guys. You lost your quarterback for the last few years in Ryan Tannehill. You lost Derrick Henry, Andre Dillard, Aaron Brewer, Travis Gibson, Danico Autry, Al-Shair, Sean Murphy-Bunting, and Terrell Edmonds. You lose all those guys. Some of your unique opponents include going to the Chargers, to the Commies, in December in FedEx Field, which is a tough game because, again, injuries happen at FedEx Field in late November, early December. And then you also play the Bengals, who are going to have Joe Burrow back and should be firing on all cylinders, looking to have a revenge season here. This is not an easy schedule when I look at it on paper. And again, you also have the NFC North, the AFC East, and we talked about your unique opponents here. It's not going to be an easy schedule at all. And I don't know that you've done enough. Even taking J.C. Latham, which makes a lot more sense when you think about the wide receivers that you got in free agency. You get Tavondre Sweat, I do like, out of Texas. You didn't have a third-round pick, and then you get Cedric Gray, Jarvis Brownlee, and a few other guys to go along with that in the day 3 picks. I think it's going to be a growing year for this team. You got a new head coach coming in. I think this is going to be a growing pains year. I think you could finish better than 6-11, like when I look at the season. But ultimately, I think your best case scenario, if everything goes well with Will Levis, the Mayo Man, as your quarterback, even with the weapons that he's got, you're taking a step back. 10-7 is the best I can absolutely see you doing, and that's if everything goes well. You get some teams that have injuries, pretty significant injuries that are going up against you at the right time. 10-7 is the best I see. I honestly could see you going worse at 4-13 this year. And reasonably, I think 6-11 is probably about where you stand for this year as well. I don't think it's going to be a significantly different year. But, guys, that's what I got for you. So, to wrap it up, AFC South, let's recap it again. I have the Indianapolis Colts and the Texans both finishing with 10-7. I do think the Texans, on talent alone, will edge them out in any of the tiebreakers, and I think they'll ultimately get that. But I do think it'll be the Texans, with the Colts being right on their heels. I think that the Jaguars will finish third, but it will be very tight. It's going to go down to the final few weeks. And then I have in a distant fourth, the Tennessee Titans. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I will be hitting one of the other AFC divisions, probably the AFC East next week as we get into the new week here. And hopefully we'll wrap this up in the next few weeks here. But thank you for watching, liking, sharing, subscribing. And as always, rise up.